The arrest has been made. The conspirator is in custody. And yet, the crisis is only deepening. Paul-Henri Damiba, the former military leader accused of orchestrating a plot to assassinate Burkina Faso's current head of state and dismantle the country's security apparatus, now sits behind bars in Ouagadougou. But France has not backed down. Instead, Paris has doubled down, issuing what sources describe as direct military threats against Burkina Faso over developments tied to neighboring Togo. In response, Russia has entered the fray with a sharp retaliatory warning, framing any French intervention as an attack on Sahel sovereignty itself. What began as a domestic security operation has exploded into a geopolitical standoff that could reshape the entire region. This is no longer just about one man or one alleged coup. This is about who controls the future of the Sahel, and whether Africa's most volatile region will break free from decades of external influence or be pulled back into the orbit of its former colonial master. Captain Ibrahim Traoré came to power in Burkina Faso in September 2022, the second military takeover in less than a year. His rise was fueled by public anger over the government's failure to contain a brutal jihadist insurgency that has killed thousands and displaced millions across the Sahel. Traoré positioned himself as a young, defiant leader determined to break with the past, willing to challenge both the terror groups ravaging his country and the foreign powers he accused of enabling the crisis. Among those powers, France loomed largest. For decades, Paris maintained a military presence across its former colonies in West Africa, justified under the banner of counterterrorism. But by the time Traoré seized power, that presence had become politically toxic. Mali had already expelled French forces. Niger would follow, and Burkina Faso, under Traoré's leadership, demanded Paris withdraw entirely. France complied reluctantly, but the relationship never recovered. Paul-Henri Damiba was Traoré's predecessor. He had led the first coup in January 2022, overthrowing the elected government of Roch-Marc Christian Kabore, citing the same failures on security that would later be used to justify his own removal. But Damiba's time in power was brief and turbulent. He maintained ties with France, resisted the wave of anti-French sentiment sweeping the region, and ultimately failed to deliver the security gains he had promised. When Traoré ousted him in September, Damiba fled the country, eventually finding refuge in Togo. There, he remained, a political exile in a nation with close historical and diplomatic ties to France. For months, his presence was a quiet irritant. But according to Burkina Faso's government, Damiba was doing far more than lying low. He was planning a return, not through politics, but through violence. Burkina Faso alleges that Damiba masterminded a coordinated assassination plot targeting not just Traoré, but 19 senior security officials. The objective, according to Ouagadougou, was not merely to kill the leadership, but to decapitate the state. The plan, as described, was surgical and devastating. Eliminate the president and the core of the military command structure in one operation, triggering chaos, paralysis, and collapse. In the vacuum, jihadist forces would surge, governance would disintegrate, and Burkina Faso would descend into the kind of fragmented nightmare that has consumed parts of Somalia, Libya, and the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. And in that wreckage, according to Traoré's allies, foreign interests would reassert control. Whether through a puppet regime, renewed military agreements, or direct intervention, the endgame was the same. Burkina Faso would lose its sovereignty. The arrest of Damiba was framed by Ouagadougou as a national security triumph. But it immediately triggered a diplomatic crisis. France, which has maintained close relations with Togo, responded not with silence, but with pressure. Reports emerged that Paris had issued direct warnings to Burkina Faso, framing the detention of Damiba and any potential trial as destabilizing to the region. The official line from France invoked old defense agreements and regional stability, painting Burkina Faso's actions as a threat to Togo's sovereignty. But the subtext was unmistakable. Damiba, whether guilty or not, was under French protection, and Traoré had crossed a line by moving against him. Then came the threats. Multiple sources indicate that France, either directly or through intermediaries, communicated the possibility of military consequences if Burkina Faso proceeded with its case against Damiba. The exact nature of those threats remains unclear. Were they warnings of targeted strikes, economic pressure, covert destabilization? Whatever the specifics, the message was received in Ouagadougou as an ultimatum, and it was met not with capitulation, but with defiance. Because Burkina Faso was no longer alone, Russia entered the crisis with a public statement that was as blunt as it was consequential. Moscow openly rejected France's framing, asserting that Burkina Faso has a legitimate right to defend its national security and hold coup plotters accountable. Russian officials went further, warning that French military pressure and strike threats risk igniting a wider regional conflict. Most significantly, Russia declared that any foreign intervention would be seen as an attack on Sahel sovereignty itself. This was not diplomatic hedging. This was a red line drawn in public and aimed directly at Paris that Russia's involvement in the Sahel is not new, but it has accelerated dramatically in recent years. As France's influence has waned, Moscow has stepped in, offering military support, trainers, and private security contractors to governments that have broken with the West. In Mali, Russian forces and Wagner Group operatives have filled the void left by departing French troops. In Burkina Faso, the relationship has grown quietly but steadily, with reports of Russian advisors and equipment flowing into the country. Traore has not publicly acknowledged the full extent of this cooperation, but the symbolism is clear. Where France once held sway, Russia is now a counterweight. And in this crisis, Moscow has chosen to make that support explicit. What makes this moment so dangerous is not just the clash of interests, but the clash of narratives. France insists it is defending regional stability and the sovereignty of Togo, a nation that did not ask for Damiba's extradition and has not publicly accused Burkina Faso of violating its borders. Paris frames its position as principled, rooted in international law and mutual defense obligations. But to Ouagadougou, and increasingly to much of the Sahel, this is a transparently self-serving fiction. France is not defending Togo. It is defending a man it sees as preferable to Traore, a man who, whether by design or circumstance, represents a version of Burkina Faso more aligned with French interests. And by threatening military action, Paris is signaling that it will not tolerate a Sahel that operates outside its influence. Russia, meanwhile, is framing this as a fight for African sovereignty. Moscow's rhetoric emphasizes self-determination, the rejection of neo-colonialism, and the right of nations to choose their own partners. It is a narrative that resonates deeply across a region that has spent decades watching foreign powers intervene, extract resources, and depart without delivering security or prosperity. Whether Russia's intentions are genuinely anti-colonial or simply opportunistic is almost beside the point. What matters is that Moscow is offering something France no longer can: unconditional support for regimes willing to defy the West. And in a region where legitimacy increasingly flows from resistance rather than alignment, that support is politically invaluable. The crisis has also exposed the limits of regional diplomacy. The Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS, has historically been the primary mechanism for managing political transitions and security crises in the region. But ECOWAS itself is fracturing. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, all governed by military juntas that seized power in recent years, have formed a mutual defense pact and have threatened to withdraw from the bloc entirely. They accuse ECOWAS of being a tool of French influence, citing the organization's harsh sanctions against their governments and its reluctance to condemn French military presence. Togo, by contrast, remains a member in good standing, aligned with the bloc's more pro-Western leadership. This split has turned what might once have been a regional dispute into a proxy battle between competing visions of West African order. And then there is the extradition question, which France has tried to center, but which Burkina Faso insists is irrelevant. Togo has not formally requested Damiba's return. There is no legal process underway demanding his release. What exists instead is French pressure, diplomatic and possibly military, aimed at forcing Ouagadougou to reverse course. This suggests that the core issue is no longer legal or procedural. it is political. France does not want Damiba tried in Burkina Faso because a trial would be public, detailed, and potentially explosive. If the allegations are proven, or even if they are simply aired in open court, the revelations could implicate foreign actors. They could expose networks of influence, funding, and coordination that extend far beyond one man. They could turn Damiba from a failed coup leader into a symbol of foreign interference. And that is a risk Paris cannot afford. Traore, for his part, has been cast by his supporters as a symbol of resistance. At just 34 years old when he took power, he represents a generational shift, a break from the old guard that governed through compromise with external powers. His rhetoric is uncompromising. He speaks of sovereignty, dignity, and the need to fight both terrorism and imperialism. He has accused France of supporting jihadist groups to justify its military presence, a claim that Paris vehemently denies, but which enjoys widespread belief across the Sahel. Whether or not Traore can deliver on his promises is uncertain. Burkina Faso remains deeply insecure, with large swaths of territory outside government control. The economy is fragile. The population is exhausted. But politically, Traore has tapped into something powerful, the sense that the old system has failed, and that only a complete break with the past can offer a path forward. Russia's backing has amplified that narrative. Moscow's statement in defense of Burkina Faso was not a favor. It was a strategic move. By positioning itself as the defender of Sahel sovereignty, Russia gains influence, credibility, and leverage. It signals to other governments in the region that alignment with Moscow offers protection from Western pressure. It deepens the wedge between France and its former colonies. And it reinforces the broader global confrontation between Western-led order and the so-called multipolar world that Russia and China have championed. In this framing, Burkina Faso is not just a country dealing with an assassination plot. It is a battleground in a much larger struggle. France, for all its military and diplomatic resources, is finding itself on the defensive. The days when Paris could intervene in West Africa with impunity are over. Public opinion across the Sahel is overwhelmingly hostile to French presence. Governments that once relied on French support are now seeking alternatives. And the justification that sustained decades of intervention, the fight against terrorism, has lost credibility. The terror threat has not diminished under French leadership. If anything, it has spread. From northern Mali to Burkina Faso to northern Nigeria, jihadist violence has expanded in scope and lethality. The narrative that France is a stabilizing force has collapsed under the weight of its own failures. But France is not retreating quietly. The reported threats against Burkina Faso suggest that Paris is willing to escalate rather than accept irrelevance. Whether that escalation takes the form of airstrikes, covert operations, or proxy support for armed groups remains to be seen. But the logic is clear. If Traore succeeds, if he consolidates power, holds Damiba accountable, and strengthens ties with Russia, he becomes a model. Other governments will follow. The Sahel will drift further from French influence. And Paris, already diminished, will lose what remains of its strategic foothold in a region it has dominated for more than a century. This is where the stakes become clear. A military confrontation between France and Burkina Faso, even a limited one, would not remain contained. Russia has made clear it would view such action as an attack on sovereignty. Other nations in the region, particularly Mali and Niger, have mutual defense agreements with Burkina Faso. ECOWAS would be forced to choose sides, likely fracturing further. And the jihadist groups operating across the Sahel would exploit the chaos, launching attacks, seizing territory, and positioning themselves as the ultimate winners of a conflict between foreign powers and fragile states. The continued aggressive posture from Paris, even after Damiba's arrest, reveals that this was never really about one man. Damiba is a symbol. He represents a version of Burkina Faso that France could tolerate, even if it could not control. His removal, his arrest, and the possibility of his trial represent the final severance of a relationship that has defined West African geopolitics for generations. France is not threatening Burkina Faso because it fears for Togo's sovereignty. It is threatening Burkina Faso because it fears losing the Sahel entirely. Russia, meanwhile, is exploiting that fear with precision. Moscow's support for Traore is not altruistic. It is transactional. Russia gains access to resources, influence over governance, and a foothold in a region that borders the Mediterranean and links West Africa to the broader struggle for influence across the continent. If France escalates, Russia wins. If France backs down, Russia also wins. The only losing scenario for Moscow is one in which the Sahel stabilizes under Western influence. And that scenario is vanishing by the day. For Burkina Faso, the path forward is treacherous. Traore has staked his legitimacy on sovereignty and security. But sovereignty without stability is hollow. The country remains under siege from jihadist forces. The economy is struggling, and the population, while supportive of Traore's defiance, is desperate for tangible improvements in safety and living conditions. If Traore cannot deliver, the narrative of resistance will lose its power, and the same forces that brought him to power could just as easily turn against him. But for now, he holds the advantage. Damiba is in custody. France's threats have been met with Russian support, and the broader Sahel is watching. If Burkina Faso weathers this storm, if Traore survives and strengthens his position, the message will resonate across the region. Defiance is possible. Alignment with the West is optional. And sovereignty, however fragile, can be defended. What happens next could redefine the region. Will France escalate, risking a confrontation that could spiral beyond its control? Will Russia deepen its involvement, turning the Sahel into another theater of great power competition? Will Traore consolidate or collapse under the weight of internal and external pressure? And will the people of Burkina Faso, caught between terror, coups, and geopolitical maneuvering, finally see the security and stability they have been promised for decades? The arrest of Paul-Henri Damiba was supposed to be the end of the crisis. Instead, it has revealed how deep the fractures run, not just within Burkina Faso, but across the Sahel, between Africa and its former colonizers, and within the global order itself. This is no longer a story about one alleged plot or one defiant leader. This is a story about power, sovereignty, and the question of who gets to decide the future of a region that has been shaped by foreign intervention for far too long. The answer to that question will determine not just what happens in Burkina Faso, but what kind of Africa emerges in the decades to come.